Well, in part two, trade policy chapter, we see that how this our current trade policy in Canada, US, and in other countries are operating. So the world is governed. The world trade is governed through right now is through WTO. This is an evolution process. It was started in 1947 with the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. We call it as a GATT, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. The principles of GATT was that each member country agreed not to make unilateral tariff increase. So one country, if they want to increase the tariff, they have to negotiate, and they mutually agreed on some tariff, not unilaterally. Later on, the GATT was converted into World Trade Organization, and we call it as a WTO. WTO is a very big organization, working multilateral organization working on the trade issues among all the member countries. So almost most of the countries of the world are the member of WTO. So various rounds of negotiation and average level of tariff has declined considerably since 1947. So since the beginning of these trade associations, now they achieve this their goal through WTO. Apart from this world level organization of a WTO, there are some regional type of organizations or associations or agreements among the countries. And in the very famous agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico is, we call it as a NAFTA. So regional trade agreements, there are many regional trade agreements. There are Mercosur between the South American countries. There's a trade agreement among the oil producing countries. There is a trade agreement between ASEAN countries. There is a trade agreement between countries in the South Asia. So we can say that some countries declare the other countries as most favored nations. So there are many regional agreements are operating. So these standard forms of regional trade liberalization agreements are free trade areas, custom unions, and common markets. So now we define these type of agreements into three different categories. Some are free trade areas. FTAs is an agreement among two or more countries to abolish tariff on trade among themselves, with each remains free to set its own tariff against other countries. So FTA between the countries, those who are a member of the FTA, they are abolishing their tariffs among themselves, but they are free to impose any tariff with the rest of the world, other than the members of that FTA. There's a custom union, that is a group of countries. They can make a custom union as well. So that agrees to have a free trade among themselves and a common set of barriers. So FTA is the first stage, and if the countries want, they can increase it, and then they can set the tariffs with the rest of the world unilaterally, or you can say that combinedly, that they make a decision that they want to increase or decrease the tariff with the rest of the world, but they follow the rule. That's what we call it as a custom union. Some of the regional agreements are custom unions, some of the regional agreements are FTAs, and the third one, which is like a common market, and European Union is an example for common market, is a custom union with the added provisions that labor and capital can move freely among the member countries. And we see that very recently, around 3-4 years ago, the UK exit the European Union common market, and that's what we call it as a Brexit. So a major effects of regional trade liberalization is to alter the pattern of a production and trade as countries relocate their resources towards the production of goods in which they have a comparative advantage. So by this way, they specialize within the region that they specialize. But these type of agreements have a two type of effects. One, we call it as a trade creation, because the countries reallocate their resources, they specialize in their within their regional agreement, and by this way they create more trade within the region. But at the same time, they are also causing some trade diversions. Like they prefer to do trade within the agreed or member countries, and then diverging the trade from other countries towards that, and that's what we call it as a trade diversion. So trade creation is a consequence of reduced trade barriers among a set of countries, whereby trade within the group is increased and trade with the rest of the world remains roughly constant. So trade creation represents efficient specialization according to a comparative advantage. On the other hand, trade diversion is a consequence of reduced trade barriers among a set of countries, whereby trade within the group replaces trade that used to take place with the countries outside the group. And this is what we call it as a trade diversion. So from the global perspective, trade diversion represents an inefficient use of resources. The main argument against regional trade agreement is that the cost of trade diversion may outweigh the benefit of trade creation. As I mentioned before, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, was dated from 1994, and it's an extension of 1989 Canada. So it's an extension, NAFTA is an extension of 1989 Canada-US Free Trade Agreements, in which we include the Mexico as well. So NAFTA was replaced in 2020 by United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement, and we call it as USMCA, US, Mexico, Canada Agreement. So NAFTA is guided by the fundamental principles of national treatments. So a key provision of NAFTA is a dispute settlement mechanism among these three countries. Other major provisions we can see that within this US all the three countries, and trade creation occurred. The flow of trade among these three countries increased markedly, but especially so between Canada and the United States. The volume of inter-industry trade also increased. The greatest potential for trade diversion is with Mexico, which competes in the Canadian and US market with a large number of products produced in the low-wage countries. Now we can present an example from the Canadian economy is a wine. So before the Canada-US FTA was signed in 1989, Canadian wine industry was heavily protected, tariff protected. So the Canadian wine producers were also required by law to use only domestically produced grapes. With few notable exceptions, Canadian winemakers produce mainly cheap, low-quality products. But when tariffs was removed under FTA, Canadian wine starts competing with imported wines in the medium quality. And now we see that the wineries are also producing high-quality wines in Canada. So we see that how this regional agreement make the industries more productive and high-quality product. So this is all what I want to share with you regarding the international trade and trade policy. So I hope you enjoy it. Please subscribe and like.